your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt. We have such sights to show you.
Hey, good evening, horror fans. Welcome to another exciting edition of the Weekly Horoscope. I'm your host, Jerry, here with my partner, Matt. And this week we are going to talk about puzzles of madness. And this is an interesting category because over history, puzzles have represented a lot of things from a kid's game to a high intellectual challenge and even some mystical properties over in different cultures. So what do you think of this category, Matt?
Yeah, I agree. And puzzles and horror can represent complex navigation through life in terms of family, work, religion, social status, dating, relationships. And if those things are navigated improperly, one can find themselves leading down to a road of hell, in the most metaphorical sense, but it can also often feel real. And so these movies really explore that idea to a more metaphysical concept of that, but it's an interesting concept nonetheless.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably the first movie that maybe jumps to modern movie viewers' minds is the Saw movies with their very direct and very, there's no subtlety to the puzzles. It's like, you got to get this device off your head or it's going to snap your head off. There's
Right.
not a lot of nuance there, but they're very popular and made.
Yeah.
I think there's 10 or 11 in the series now.
I think they just came out with the 10th one, but yeah, there's not a lot of symbolism in those movies. It's like, hey, you were a bad person. Now let's take this knife and shove it in your stomach to get the key out to save your head. Right.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
just real.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And well, there's certainly moments in those movies and in that series that are certainly worth delving into. We wanted to go, a little bit deeper and a little bit different direction with maybe some more subtlety in the puzzle and maybe some more indirect reference to how this is all going to tie together.
Yeah, and I think both of these movies are pretty layered with symbolism.
Yeah, I agree. I remember, we'll talk about our first movie here, Hellraiser from 1987, directed by Clive Barker. And I had discovered Clive Barker about a year earlier I was a teenager and I was at a horror convention, and I discovered there were people talking about these books, the books of blood. And so on the spot without two nickels to rub together, I scraped together enough money to buy the three volumes 1 through 3 of the quote American versions, and volumes 4, 5, and 6 that were only released in the British version. And they were later released as part of different collections, but I scooped them all up, and I'm like, wow, this guy's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I've only read the Hellborn Heart, which is the book for Hellraiser, and I loved it. I read it in like 2 days. I mean, it's just a short novella, but it immediately when you're reading it, you're like, this guy's a genius, and he's got a huge vocabulary.
Yeah,
I had to look up a word every couple pages. I was like, what?
Yeah, I've actually read all of his novels. I believe all of his novels, and he's a complex and very deep, thoughtful guy. And he directed this movie because he was unhappy with Hollywood's treatment of his works up to this point. And he had enough clout and enough maneuverability there to put himself forward and get a directorial debut, which he hit it out of the park.
Yeah. It's slightly different than the book, but it's still, I mean, this movie is iconic and it still works. One thing I love about this movie is that even if you take the Cenobites out of it, it still works as a really cool slasher movie. The woman bringing people back and killing them for her ex-lover so he could gain power, right? And then you add the Cenobites and it adds this really sinister demonic level to the movie, and I think it gives it layers.
This movie came out in 1987, and I thought about this a lot as we started to go into this category and look at this movie. And I went and I look at the biggest horror movies of 1986. And, the titles they came up with were Poltergeist 2, Critters, Friday the 13th, Part 6, Deadly Friend, a Wes Craven, little known Wes Craven movie, um, Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2,
A lot of rehashing of old ideas.
the
Right?
Stephen King directed Maximum Overdrive. And
Yeah.
with the exception of probably The Fly, which was a real genius movie from 1986. The thing that struck me as I looked at all these is they're somewhat cheesy.
Yeah.
You go to 1987 and you look at Hellraiser, and a term that we use a lot or is thrown around a lot today is elevated horror. And I started thinking about this, and I'm like, wow, this movie really became elevated horror for 1987 because it is dead serious. There's very little cheesiness or hokiness to it, and it takes on, sadomasochism. It takes on sexual deviancy. It takes on incest. Uh, Murder from just a regular person because of her wanton desires. I'm like, this movie isn't playing around.
No, yeah, and it also takes itself serious too. Not like you said, like there's no hokiness in this movie whatsoever, and it does that even with like the visual effects as well. Like there's some cheesiness in the computerized effects towards the end, which I don't think they could help because of the budgetary constraints. But I mean, as far as the practical effects, I mean, it takes itself serious in that realm too. Like they want it to be realistic. They want it to look as gory as possible, and it does that really well. And like you said, with the themes, they get you involved in these characters. Like you really feel the bitterness in the married couple, and you feel like there's like something distraught going on, and you get involved with them, and you find out that she's cheating on her husband with their brother who's like come back from it gets really vicious, and it gets you really involved with the characters.
That's funny. I made the exact my note was the digital effects are dated and unfortunately are the only thing I would say about the movie that are a little hokey, and that's just a product of the time. The practical effects hold up to this day perfectly.
To this day. Yeah. I mean, this movie, like if you showed this movie to a modern 15-year-old, they'd be like, holy crap, it's freak them out. Like this movie has a very realistic touch to it.
Absolutely.
Actually, in the very opening scene, when they're putting Frank's face back together, that was actually they had real meat they got from the butcher, and then they had to reshoot that without the meat, and they couldn't put it in there because they were afraid they were going to get sued for animal cruelty. They were trying as hard as they could to put real flesh in there and really do it. But they're like, no, we can't do it. The studio was like, can't do that. So.
Well, I'll tell you, it looks real. Our movie starts with Frank. He buys an Oriental puzzle box, and he's at a shady street market somewhere. And he takes it, and we see him perform a ritual. He lights candles. He's on his knees, and he starts to fiddle with this puzzle box. And he opens it, and the walls start creaking. Strange lights appear behind the wood. And we have the something we've talked about before in our imagery when we were talking about that. We have the chains that shoot out of darkness with no origin and just sink into his flesh. And we cut to the room, and the room there's rotating wooden posts in the middle, and they're just covered with chains and hooks, and chunks of body parts are stuck through nails. And there is body parts and gore all over the floor. And it is spectacular in its presentation. It is like, holy crap.
It would be like the ultimate, like haunted house. I remember watching it thinking like this would be such a cool setup. Like they even have the sound effects. It's like this like groaning boar, like this groaning animal kind of in the background. Like even an animal is suffering. Like it just you hear like the sound of like buzzing flies, and it just sounds like death and suffering.
Yeah, absolutely. We get our first glimpse of Pinhead, played wonderfully by Doug Bradley, and the tone and the delivery of his voice is extremely iconic. Everything he says becomes a catchphrase because of how he delivers it. You know, the lines are dark and gruesome, but his delivery just puts the icing on the cake in my estimation.
Yeah, he just brings this regal Shakespearean performance to a demonic character that we hadn't seen before. It wasn't some maniacal slasher guy. It was very posed and in control, like a general, you know, and like has this like very regal sense to him, which kind of makes it even creepier.
Absolutely. He takes the puzzle box and the room is turned back to normal. And then we see our couple, Larry and Julia, arrive at this old house. It was his mother's, but it's been empty 10 years, except he thinks his brother Frank has been using it as a hideout. And they go inside and it's just a mess. It's an absolute mess. And as they start going through it, Julia finds Frank's stuff and starts looking through it. And we get a picture of Frank. He's got pictures with a bunch of different women. He's very much into pushing the boundaries of lust and sex and pain, and he wants to experience all there is in the world. And you kind of get this vibe that this guy's just pushing boundaries everywhere he can, and that's probably how he got in the situation he got in.
Yeah, and it's delving into, like you said, it's delving into the sadomasochist world, you know, where like the pain becomes pleasure and how far they're willing to take that. Like these pictures weren't exactly sensual, you know, they were very like aggressively sexual. So they're literally painting the picture with these pictures of like what type of stuff he was into.
Yeah, and you can see, you know, touches like that, you know, very simple character development with a simple presentation. You kind of get to see the brilliance of Clive Barker and translated to the screen. He hadn't made a movie before, but he really brings up some clever techniques and some things a really polished director would bring to the table.
Yeah, which is done surprisingly well, because, you know, you read the book and it's very articulate, and then you watch the movie and it's, you know, you have to get rid of it. You can't articulate all that. So he does it visually in a different way, and it's brilliant. And
he's also a painter, so I guess it makes sense that he has, you know, has all these different artistic abilities to bring a vision to you. But
he's just a genuinely genius creative, you know, on all sorts of platforms.
Yeah, we see Julia going through all this stuff, and now she's up in the attic where we realize Frank had performed this ritual before, and she's looking through all this stuff, and she's flashing back, and we can see, you know, that he comes to her. She doesn't know, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm the brother," and he's very sexually aggressive, and they had an affair, and she is turned on thinking about him right there in the attic. And yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was just going to continue with that. Go ahead.
It seems like she's not with the brother she wishes she was with. That's all I was going to add.
Yeah, and you know, you can see it in her mannerisms. She's kind of cold-shouldered to, like, she's kind of being cold to Larry. Like, you can just tell there's like this, like, there's something going on in the relationship where she's not happy with them, and like there's, you know, like even when like later when they're like moving stuff in, she won't even help, and he's like, no, don't worry about it, fine, I'll do it. You know, like, and you can tell that they're kind of the relationship's on the fringe, you know.
Yeah, and she also doesn't have a good relationship with Larry's daughter, Christy. From whose mother had passed, they mentioned. But yeah, you can feel the tension and also the longing for, you know, she has desires that go elsewhere.
And she was also the in They Live, right? Is it the same actress?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't make that connection. Larry is moving a mattress. You can look it up quick, right? He's trying to move in a mattress, and in a really well done, another great visual effect, we see his hand, we see him moving the mattress, and his hand drag across a nail that's sticking out, and it's just gashed, and he's bleeding everywhere. He comes up to the attic where she still is reminiscing, and he's holding his hand, and the blood is just dripping out, gushing out, and we see it splash on the floor, and we see it dripping all over the attic. And then she takes him, and they're going to go get his hand looked at. And then we see the blood seep into the floorboards of the attic and disappear. Yeah. And I always thought, like, I wonder why they never went back and said, we didn't clean up this blood. Where did it all go?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they don't do this in the movie, but in the book, Larry doesn't want to go look at the blood again. He doesn't even want to clean it up, and it's mentioned in the book. Another reason why she's kind of sick of him. She's like, he won't even clean up blood, like he's a wimp. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
like he won't. So he doesn't even want to go look at it and clean it up. So they don't say that in the movie, but it's kind of, I guess it's implied if you know. So
Yeah, I got you.
yeah.
They when they leave,
It's not the same actress, by the way. I looked it up.
okay.
Yeah.
Similar eyes. I think I know what you were looking at the eyes, right?
The woman you can't trust. She just looks evil.
Once they leave, the floor has absorbed all this blood, and now it starts oozing this slime, this fluid, and then this membrane, unformed, fibrous, skeletal human climbs up from the floor.
This is one of the best goopiest scenes in the entire movie. Of all the stuff they do to deconstruct people's bodies, this one thing of resurrecting is actually one of the coolest things they do.
I think from this point forward, it's nonstop goopy.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, we cut to a dinner party at the house, and here we see more of the tension. Everybody's having a good time except Julia. The issues with Larry are apparent. Doesn't have a good relationship with his daughter, Christy. She's going to go to bed. Like, she just bails on the party. She just doesn't want any part of it. No social interaction. On her way upstairs, she hears a noise in the attic and goes up to find the slimy, half-developed husk of Frank. Yeah. And he talks to her. And he's not even like a skeleton. He's like, all I can think of is he's like membranes. He's like fibrous membrane stretched over a skeleton.
Yeah, he was like a larva with a skull. I don't know. He couldn't even stand up yet. He was like crawling. Yeah.
But it was cool. I mean, it was so cool to look at.
Yeah.
And I saw this in the theaters, and I remember like, holy crap, I haven't seen anything quite like this before.
I don't think anyone had. I think this kind of took the world by storm in 1987, and since then it just became one of the most iconic franchises of all time.
Now, I like the sequel. I like 2. Pretty much the rest of them are all garbage.
Yeah, they fell apart. The first 2 are absolutely the best. 2 is also really good. We could have done that one too. But why not do the original? Because we can do 2 some other. We can do 2 some other time. There was a couple. The rest are garbage. There was a couple in there though that I didn't mind watching for like just popcorn night. Let's just watch this. Some of them for a good kill here and there and a good one-liner. Yeah, they get kind of wonky, but I mean, I still enjoy some of them.
To me, it's like, because the bar was set so high. And again, I'm starting to refer to this as elevated horror because of the time this was put out. It was deeper and darker than anything else that was going on out there. And when you start with that standard, and then you start devolving into, Friday the 13th, Part 9, Jason rides a boat. It's like, come on, you can't drift that far from how high the peak of the source was. That's what's so disappointing.
I think one thing that drifted away from in the series moving forward was the stories for the people weren't that interesting. It was all kind of just cheesy, like in this one, you actually, there's like Frank is a deviant who's actually exploring this world because he wants to push beyond the pleasures he's gone in this world. And he's also lusting after his brother's wife, and she's enticed by it. Right. Yeah. So there's a real theme there. There's a real story there, and
family dynamic, a step parent dynamic.
And then later, also exactly all sorts of stuff. And then later in the movie, like they don't really go back into that later on. It's kind of like some jerk business guy finds the cube, and then that's it, or like
Frank tells Julia that he needs more blood to continue his regeneration. And as ridiculous and as shocking and as nasty as this business sounds, she is obsessed with him and agrees to help.
which kind of goes into the theme of how far you're willing to push the boundaries of pleasure, like what you're willing to do to destroy someone else's life or your own life or your family's life to pursue your pleasures. And people do it all the time.
Yeah. Well, and it shows a selfishness and a real lack of empathy for your fellow humans that, everyone, I guess, has the ability to display, but Julia comes full on hard with it. She's just she's just not a nice person.
No, she's a killer.
She goes to a day bar and picks up a guy and brings him home and kills him with a hammer. And it's a little strung out. She doesn't quite know how to act. It's it's awkward. It's uncomfortable. She finally gets him up to the attic. He's going to leave to go use the bathroom. And then she finally does it. And then she looks away as Frank, drains the guy of basically all of his blood and his life essence.
Yeah.
And he becomes a little bit more whole. And we see that, again, these awesome practical effects where he's becoming like a skeletal figure with glistening, moist blood muscles on him.
Yeah, and there's full-blown conversations with him in this suit. It's not like a quick flash thing. It's like he's standing there with like goop coming down his chin while she's talking to him. He's like, "Come talk to me," And it's just like, oh. And she does it. She's like, okay. She's like, possessed by this idea to be with him and like seduced by it.
Yep. He says he's going to need a couple more before he can get whole, and they can get away together before the Cenobites track him down. So he's luring in with this promise of a life together that she's lusted for him since their first encounter.
And he's using reaffirming language too. It's really intelligent. He's like, "Isn't that what you want, Julia?" And she's like, "Yes." You know what I mean? Like kind of hypnotizing her. Yeah.
In the flashback scene where he seduces her, there's a scene where after they're together physically, she's holding him from behind and she's just completely enamored. And she tells him, "Anything you want, I'll do anything you want." And and it demonstrates her, complete commitment to him and to her desires.
Yeah, and it's interesting because he is now evoking that eternal promise, that anything you want, and then he later opens up the lament configuration and opens up another promise. The Cenobites come and they're saying, "Well, now you're ours," just like you were trying to keep her. You were trying to get her to do your bidding, and now we're just doing that to you, man. Like this is what happens.
Yeah, yeah. So she goes and gets another guy, and she kills him with less awkwardness and less moral hesitation. She's just full on in now.
Yeah, she's a seasoned vet,
and he's more whole. He's still slimy and skinless, but he's more of himself. He wants to kill his brother. He's like, let me just finish off Larry.
Yeah, he's in the house. It'll be quick. You don't have to go out to a bar. Like we can just do this now. Yeah,
it'll be done with.
Yeah.
But she forbids it. And her and Larry try to be intimate. And Frank's actually watching from the closet. And he's wearing like a shirt and pants, but he still doesn't have skin. And like there's blood all over the edges of the shirt.
Which I think is cool because they're showing like, he's starting to become more human. He's starting to get his civilized self back, but he's still like the unskinned man. Like he's like having wine and a cigarette, but he's a skeleton,
Yeah, and the visuals are so good. I mean, it's what you would envision a man with no skin would look like.
Yeah, I don't think you could do it any better nowadays. I think that'd still be the standard,
And there's a scene where they're talking and she takes his finger and she puts it in her mouth seductively and is licking it and moving it around. And there's no skin on it. It's like just this raw piece of exposed meat. And it's like, okay, this lady is twisted.
Yeah. This is what she wants. She's in for it.
So she brings home yet another man. But on this trip, Christy had come to try to make amends with her and try to repair their relationship. And she sees them go into the house together, and then she hears the man's screams from the attic. Yeah. So she goes into the house, where she sees a dead man who looks like he's had the life sucked out of him, and her skinless Uncle Frank, who she hadn't seen in years since she was a little girl. And he grabs her and immediately hits on her.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, you've gotten pretty. And he's like very aggressive.
Yeah.
And it's like,
it goes into that, like you said, the ancestral stuff,
and he doesn't blink an eye that
Right.
that's his niece. He doesn't care. Like he's just like, oh, this might be pleasurable, period. Like with no other thought.
Yeah. Because I mean, that's what he's been seeking, right? He's just constantly seeking what's the ultimate perverted thing you can do for pleasure,
They struggle a little bit, and she takes the puzzle box and throws it out through the window, and she leaves. And she goes outside and she picks it up, but she's weirdly disoriented. Gets dizzy, and then she passes out on the street.
Yeah.
And she wakes up in the hospital with the puzzle box, and people have questions. They want to know what's going on. There's blood on her. They say the cops are going to want to talk to her. She wants to call her father, but they won't let her. She's basically locked in. But they leave the puzzle box with her.
Yeah, I don't even know if that's ethical. I think they legally have to let her do that, but it was 87.
Yeah. So of course, when a puzzle box is sitting in front of you, and for those who haven't seen it, it's like a different. It's like a Rubik's cube with complex shapes and different angles, and it can turn in infinite directions. It seems.
It almost has this like I don't know. It almost has this like ancient Egyptian style look to it, like with its geometry. It's lots of like triangles and rectangles and squares that kind of like reconfigure around, but it also is like a Rubik's cube, like you said. It's an interesting piece
for sure. So of course she starts playing with it, and it opens, and the walls shake, and the walls split open, and a passageway appears, and she starts walking down the passageway and encounters a scorpion-like demon who chases her back into her room.
Which I believe they call the engineer. I think that's what the engineer. It's not engineer in the book. It's much different. But I think if that in the movie, that's what the engineer was.
She makes it back to her hospital room, and the Cenobites are there waiting for her. And the Cenobites everyone knows Pinhead, there's the man, but there's the chattering one with the teeth. Yeah. There's the lady with the wires through her head. And there's the heavyset guy with the glasses. Like it's
Butterball.
They're just, it's this unbelievable eclectic group of these sadomasochists. They all have scars where different parts of their body are torn open or missing. And
it seems like the leather stuff they're wearing is like connected to their skin, so it's almost like they're patched to it together with this like leather bondage.
They are goth to the extreme.
Yeah, that's exactly what they are, goth.
And but they're going to take her. You opened the box, you called us, and she offers to give them Frank instead. And so hey, you lost him. And they're like, okay. And they finally agree because they want him back. They don't lose anybody.
I think she cries at this scene, and he goes, "Don't cry. So don't cry. It's a waste of good suffering."
Yeah.
Another one of those good
his
lines.
Yeah, and he just delivers it with this deep, a British accented voice. It's a wonderful thing.
It's awesome.
Christy goes back to the house, and Julia lets her in, and she's being all friendly, and her father's there. And she hugs her father, not noticing that the skin around his hairline is all blood, and he's not himself. And we realize quickly that they finally did kill Larry, and Frank is wearing his skin.
Yeah.
She doesn't realize it until what she thinks is her dad starts acting really creepy towards her, and then she realizes it's Frank. And she tries to get away, and Julia grabs her. And Frank picks up a blade, and he's going to stick her. But as he runs forward, she ducks out of the way, and he knifes Julia.
Yeah.
Well, now,
And then remorse, like with no remorse, just like grabs her and says, well, okay, I guess I'll take your life.
yeah, he's whole now. She helped him, and he's like, too bad, but I want other things now. And he's
Yeah.
turned his attention. He just, like you said, completely remorseless. But he wants Christy, even though she's his niece. That's his sole focus now.
Yeah. And it goes, it's right back into the incestual part, because now it's the uncle, but it's looking like the skin of the dad. So the uncle with the skin of the dad is going after the niece.
And you think about, I mean, it was horrific enough from her perspective originally. You think of how horrific it is now. It's
right.
Next
That's
level.
a nightmare. It's a nightmare in itself. Yeah, yeah. My dead demonic uncle is wearing my dad's skin and trying to rape me.
Yeah, yeah. Good times for all. She leads him back up to the attic where the Cenobites lie in wait, and we see the chains fly from the darkness, and the Cenobites are lecturing him on you can't escape us, and they hook into his flesh over and over in all different spots, and we see another really great visual effect where the chains start pulling outward. We see his face is stretched out. It looks like a lion's mane.
Yeah.
And then finally it's his flesh bursts. He's pulled in all directions. It's such high tension that he just pulls it all apart.
Yeah, Pinhead tells Kirsty to leave. She's like, this isn't for your eyes. Get out of here. And so she's darting for the door. And then right as she's about to shut the door, he said, I don't know why he says it, but he says, Jesus wept. And then you see he just comes flying apart.
Yeah. And again, it was the effects were super good for 1987, and they look great today.
I think they still do. You can watch this in high def. I think they restored it.
So now the Cenobites are after Christy, which I guess don't make a deal with demons from hell, because they might not keep their word,
because they're for demons from hell.
Yeah. But as they stalk her, and they're not like a Michael Myers or a Freddy. They're slow moving. They're very methodical. They keep their composure at all times. But they're just persistent to the end. She finds the puzzle box, and she starts turning it in different configurations, and she finds that the puzzle box is able to, and this is the part where I thought the visual effects were unfortunately a little weak because of the time, but lights come out of the box and each Cenobite disappears. Then another one comes in the room and she has to configure the box a different way, and that one disappears. So she's trying to do all this and get rid of them all, and her boyfriend Steve shows up, and through breaking down these dimensions, the house is starting to collapse.
Yeah.
And the last Cenobite is closing in on him, and the house finally falls on top of him. And they open the door to leave, and that scorpion-like demon, the engineer, is blocking their exit. So she again starts playing with the box. She has
a little slap box thing going on with the engineer, which I thought it's one of the cheesier parts of the movie. They're kind of like slapping each other back and forth. I was like, what?
Yeah, the quality of the creature of the engineer doesn't meet the rest of the practical effects. It is a little cheesy. Yeah. But she's fighting him off while still trying to configure the box, and finally she vanquishes the engineer. And they get outside, her and her boyfriend. The house is destroyed, and she throws the puzzle box into a burning pile of rubble. A homeless man walks up, one that she had encountered before, and he was just doing creepy stalker stuff through the whole movie, including going into the pet store she worked at and just eating handfuls of crickets.
And just staring her in the eyes while he's doing it, and she kicks him out. And he's like, "All right, fine." Never says a word though, right? Just looks at her weird.
Yeah, so he walks up, reaches into the burning pile of rubble, and pulls the box out. At which point he starts to catch on fire, but is transformed into a winged creature skeleton, and he flies away with the box. and we cut to another man sitting at the same Oriental market trying to buy the puzzle box. Like it's a complete
The
full
cycle is
circle.
the cycle is gonna start all over again for someone else. Yeah.
But they took a very serious approach to the movie and to some taboo subjects, and they took them face on.
Yeah.
And I really think this was a groundbreaking and genre shifting movie in 1987.
Yeah, and like you said, they take it serious. They don't pull any punches. I think they do. I think they did this movie properly. It's one of I think it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time, and it does it for a numerous amount of reasons. Things we discussed. The story, the theme, the symbolism. The practical effects. They put it all together. Just perfectly.
Yeah, absolutely. Great flick. Hellraiser 1987. If you haven't seen it, check it out. And forget the sequels beyond 2 and forget the remake.
Yeah. They're not worth it.
Our second film in the category Puzzles of Madness is the movie Cube from 1997, directed by Vincenzo Natali. This is a Canadian film, and I had not seen this movie before. I'd actually been prompted to watch it by a friend of mine several times. I had never gotten around to it, so this was a new experience for me. Had you seen this one, Matt?
Yeah, I saw this movie when it came out when I was like 12.
Nice.
I loved it then. It was two of my favorite things, math and horror. And I was like, oh, cool. This has both of them.
This movie starts with a man waking up in a cubed room, and there's square doors in the center of every wall, ceiling, and floor. So it's like every side's exactly the same. And he starts opening doors and looking, and all the rooms seem exactly the same but different colors.
Yep.
And he steps into another room and is sliced into cubes by a high-speed wire mesh trap. And this was an amazing effect, and what an opening to the movie. I've actually seen this scene about 10 times because of how impressive it is.
Yeah, and it basically turns into meat cubes, but it happens so quickly that like he's aware of it, and then slowly his body just falls apart. And
they start sliding off and slapping on the ground. It's impressive.
Yeah, Resident Evil and The Cell would later on with Jennifer Lopez. Those two movies would go do the same thing later on, but this was the first time it happened, I believe.
Yeah, it was very cool effect, and it's like, okay, what the heck is going on here?
Yeah.
So we cut to another room. We see there's a guy crawls into the room, and his name is Quentin. And there's a man sleeping in the room who's Worth, and they're just trying to figure out what's going on. And then finally, a Dr. Holloway, she climbs in and she joins them. And
I'd just like to say, I found this on the internet. All of the characters are named after prisons.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. The Renee Penitentiary in France, Holloway Women's Prison in UK, Kazan Prison in Russia, Leavenworth in prison, and San Quentin State Prison. So all of the characters are named after prisons.
Yep.
Which is just cool.
Yeah, I thought that was cool too. A woman named Levin comes in. She's a math student. And finally, Ren, who is he comes through the top, and they recognize the name, and he is famous for escaping maximum security prisons.
Yeah.
So he knows
all the sensors. He can figure out all the sensors really good.
Yeah, he's the one with the plan right away. He takes off his boot, and he's using his boot to throw into a room to see if it's booby trapped or not. And there's booby trap. He throws a boot into a room, and like flamethrowers torch it. And it's like, okay, well, we're not going in that room.
It's a slightly good idea, but it also, once they get more sophisticated, like what if it's sound activated or heat activated or motion? Like, well, I guess motion would be boot, but there's what if it's weight activated?
Yeah, I was going to say weight sensors on the floor. Exactly.
Yeah. Like after 20 kilograms, it's, what I mean? So like, yeah, I mean, I guess that'll activate some things, but not all of them, but we'll find that out later.
Yeah. No, we'll find out pretty quickly. no one remembers how they got there. One person was sleeping, one person was buying groceries. They have no recollection of being abducted. They just woke up there. They're
Pretty much
all
the predecessor to Saw stuff that we'll see in the 5 years later, to 60, almost 10 years later with Saw. Right?
Yeah, for sure. Some of that. They all have uniforms with their names on it. Quentin is a cop, and he kind of tries to take charge at the beginning, and they keep following Ren, who continues to test rooms by using his boots. But as you mentioned, he very quickly goes into a room that the boot didn't trigger anything, and the room blasts acid straight into his face. And his head slowly dissolves. He's screaming and flailing, and it slowly dissolves into a hollow hole. And it looks like a bowl when it's all done.
Yeah, it's like a face canoe. It just kind of gets hollowed out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So we learn there are different triggers in different rooms, and to your point, the boot will not always do the job.
Yeah. So now they're thinking, all right, we still need to come up with an idea of what's going on here. So they're still thinking.
Every room, they notice as they go through the doors, has a number with 3 sets of 3 digits. And Levin is the math student, and she determines that the rooms with prime numbers have traps and the others don't. So they start moving around using this theory.
Yep.
They're in a room, and the door over them opens, and a man, Kazan, falls into them, just falls down. And we quickly see he is an autistic man, doesn't really speak. He makes a lot of grunts and noises. And of course, Dr. Holloway, she works for a free clinic, so she wants to bring him along, help him, and take care of him. So he joins their group.
Yep. Yeah, she's very compassionate, and she's a doctor, and she's able to help kind of like guide him and can communicate with him and kind of keep him part of the pack.
They continue to move using their prime number theory, and I'm a numbers person also.
Yeah.
One thing that struck me when she first started going through the prime numbers is it took her an awful long time to figure out, the first rule of eliminating prime is all your even numbers are automatically eliminated. And then when you move to your odds, all your 5s are automatically eliminated. And I know I'm nitpicking here, but the number was 692, and she thought about it for a minute to say, no, that's not prime. And the next number was 495, and she did the same thing. I'm like, come on, if you're a mathematician, instantly those are not prime numbers.
I was thinking that when I was watching this, I was like, I wonder how quick Jerry's going to pick up on this, because you're notoriously very fast with math. And I was just like, I bet he's going to pick this up faster than the average person.
Now, if you got your 1s and your 3s and your 7s and your 9s, they require deep analysis, but the rest do not.
Yeah,
so that was my only point.
Yeah. But
I'm nitpicking, of course.
No, but she is supposed to be incredibly good at math, and that's a basic, easy mental note rule to do, right? So it's like, if she's so good at math, why didn't she just pick up on that immediately and then explain that rule to the audience? Or right?
Right.
Quentin could have been like, how are you picking up on that so quick? Well, and then boom, explain your rule, right? It would have been like, oh, okay, that makes sense. But no, it was, it doesn't matter. Like you said, it actually, the math does get deeper. So it
gets a lot deeper. It changes dramatically because in our very next scene, they're in a room that is deemed safe, and they rotate who goes in first. So they take turns. Well, Quentin goes in, and they stop him before he gets fully caught, but he gets his leg cut by a trap that he almost walked into in what was supposed to be a safe room. So he gets out with just a cut on his leg, but their theory no longer works. And now they're real hesitant about how to move around.
And that would have been another cool kill, just like the original. It's like in the opening scene with the wire, but it would have twisted on you instead of going through you.
Yeah, it came up like a Venus flytrap.
Yeah, and then spindled,
and then turned right. Yeah,
I was like, oh, that would have been gnarly.
Worth has been quiet the whole time, and when he gets away with just a cut on his leg, Quentin is angry and he confronts him, and he suspects he's part of the whole who put him here, and he's not saying too much, so he thinks he's in on it. And after they go, squawk back and forth a little bit, Worth admits to working on the outer shell. He was hired to build an outer shell, but he knows nothing about the insides. He knows nothing about why it was built or why they are there.
Yeah, and he was like, "Listen, that's how all these big projects are." And Holloway's agreeing too. She's like, "That's how these big, massive government projects are. They isolate everyone, so one hand doesn't know what the other hand's doing. It keeps everyone in secret. I do top secret stuff, right?" So
yeah, you're assigned to make widgets, and you don't know that your widget is now the engine that runs a weapon of mass destruction. You just keep making widgets. Yeah. Yep. But they do learn from his knowledge of the outer shell that Levin determines there are over 17,000 rooms in the cube.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it was 434 square feet. So that's what Worth says. And then Levin paces back and forth and determines that the rooms are 14 by 14. So 26 rooms high across would be 17,000 rooms.
Yeah. 26 by 26, completely three-dimensional, over 17,000 rooms. And that's daunting when they hear that. It kind of takes the air out of everybody.
Yeah. Like, we won't be home for dinner.
Yeah. Well, now that they know the prime number thing doesn't work, she's looking at it and she believes the numbers are coordinates on a 3D map of this cube.
Yep. So
they use this to try to piece together the coordinates they need to point towards. They're trying to get to the outer edge.
Yeah. She's like, "Oh, it's Cartesian coordinates, and that's how you find where you're at in the 3D space." And so they really think that they're onto something, and they start following that path.
So the math does get more complicated, as you mentioned. They come to a room where they realize sound is the trigger, and they have to go through this room silently. And because of his space on the spectrum, Kazan randomly makes noises.
Yeah, this is where I would have died.
Because you can't be quiet?
No, not when it comes to sneaking around.
Yeah.
I'm a 225-pound bumbling idiot.
Well, at this point, Quentin wants to leave Kazan. He's like, "We'll come back for him. Just leave him here." But of course, nobody else wants to go along with that. Because he said he can't be trusted to be quiet. And I certainly do understand his concern. But the way they go one at a time.
Yeah.
So, there was a way to make this work without putting anybody at risk.
I want to hear your theory on this.
Well, they could have made Kazan go first.
Yeah.
And if he's not quiet, then,
well, yeah. Instead of, I see what you're saying. Yeah.
And everybody else stays back in safety. But at the very least, they could have had one person he trusted the most go first, and then Kazan goes second, and then whatever happens. But what they should have done, and we'll get into a little bit, everybody makes it over, and Quentin goes last. And as Quentin is going through, Kazan's standing at the opening and makes one of his noises.
Yep. And
Quentin almost dies. When they got him through, he should have been brought far away from the access to that room. He should have been taken to the other side of the other room, or possibly even moved to another room.
Okay, that's another good point too. Right? Yeah.
He's just hanging in the doorway, and one of his noises comes out.
Just watching, and you're letting the individual who's susceptible to sensory overload watch one of the most sensory overloading things you could. They should have isolated him, and Holloway should have taken the corner and said, "Look at me. I'm going to tell you a story. We're going to play a game. Yep. We're going to." You're right. Yep.
But they don't. He's just hanging in the doorway, and it's not his fault. One of his noises comes out, and Quentin is almost killed, but he makes it.
Yep. Two good points you just made. I actually didn't think of it like that when I was good points.
Thank you. So he gets down and he gets into it with Dr. Holloway, and it's funny because his argument wasn't you shouldn't have had him near the door where his sound could have put me in jeopardy. His argument was just, I told you we should have left him. And they get into this back and forth, and then Quentin slaps her.
Yeah.
Hard and violent. And she says, I wonder, because he mentions he's from a divorced situation. He's like, I think I know why your wife left you. And do you put your hands on your kids like that? And she really digs into his psyche a little bit. And we had thought of Quentin, he first presented as like a leader, somebody who's going to get things done. Let's get out of here. He was very positive. And now we start to question, is he really that guy? Or is he another guy?
His character, it starts to come out. And like you said, she says, she's like, no wonder your wife left you. Got all that bottled up anger. She's like, and this is another thing. She says, she's like, and you got a thing for young girls, because he's kind of being nice to Eleven. He's being abnormally nice to Eleven, right?
Yeah.
Like, hey, kiddo, stick with me. You'll be all right, And Holloway points
Picks
that
up
out.
on it.
Yeah, she's like, hey, you got a thing for little girls, huh? You pervert. You know what I mean? Like, is like you're abusive, you're divorced, and you're hitting on a young girl. You're kind of a shady character.
Yep. So using the theory of the positions in the cube, they make it to the outer edge of the cube, and they open the door, and it's just blackness. But it's not another room, so they know that they are at the outer edge, and they're going to make a rope out of the clothing, the uniforms they were all wearing, and somebody's going outside. And Holloway determines it's going to be her. Levin was going to go. Quentin wanted to go, but he was too heavy. And they're like, we won't be able to hold you. The clothes won't hold up. So they finally decide it's going to be Holloway. So she's out there exploring. She can't find anything. She can't see anything. And she starts to do swings where she pushes off the wall, trying to find something on the outer arc of her swing. But those swings create a real tension on the people holding the clothing. And on her third swing, they lose her. And she's about to fall, except Quentin gets a hold of it and stops her from falling.
Yeah.
So now he's the only one with the hold of the clothes, and he's leaning out the opening, and then he purposely lets her go.
Yeah. Yeah. And they can tell. You can tell. They let you know it's intentional, because his grip opens up, and he just looks at her in the face and he doesn't say anything. He just like, bye,
One thing I found, like you don't know where they are. You don't know anything about, you've not seen any scene outside of these rooms, which I actually read and the production, the rooms look like, the doors and everything, they look real quality. They seem heavy. They make a thud. It's like a massive undertaking, this cube. I read they built 1.5 cubes to do this.
Yeah, you'd only have to film the scene in the cube, and then the other half would be for the exit and entrance, right?
Yeah,
and that's all.
So they did it all with actually only building 1.5 rooms, and they kept changing the lighting and everything, so the rooms all look different, and they kept showing different nameplates. But there's really only 1.5 room, which I thought was, clever. This was a low budget movie, and I thought that was pretty well done.
That's the brilliance of that storytelling you can do with film, right? Like, you can really get someone immersed into a world, and it's just a trick. It's a magic trick. It's a sleight of hand, right? We really believe there's 17,000 of these rooms because of all the different effects. Yeah, they filmed it all in one cube and just changed up the effects and the lighting.
I love, and this happens all the time in films and TV shows. You get an outside shot of a building or a house or whatever, and then you get somebody at a door, and then you get interior shots that are never in that same building.
Yeah, but
you don't know it.
And you don't even think about it when you watch the movie. You're not sitting there trying to deconstruct it. You're like immersed in this world of the story they're telling, and you never even stop to think of it.
Yeah, and it flows naturally.
Yeah,
you think about it when you're thinking about making a movie, and you're like, okay, what would be great for an exterior, but what has the interior spaces that I need? And they might be in different countries, but you can make it work on film.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Or they'll say something is in California, and it was like, yeah, we filmed this in Minnesota.
I did find it interesting when he let her go. Um, she falls, but there's no impact and no sound.
Well, it's a 26-story building, isn't it? I mean, it's huge. So I mean, they only show her falling like 8 stories, and I mean, I wouldn't have even gone outside. I would have looked outside real quick, heard that the whistle of the wind, and went right back in. Like, nope, we got to find another way. It's just all pitch black when you look out there. It's like, where are you going to go? What was the point swinging? What are you trying to find? A window? Like,
Yeah, like another building that you can get into that I don't know.
Yeah, one look on the outside.
I guess if you
like,
feel completely trapped, you're willing to explore possibilities.
that's
A
a
little light
great
would have
point
been
too.
nice, but
Yeah.
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 So he kills her flat out. He
Yep.
he lets her go.
So we know at this point his character, he is a murderer.
Yeah. He is not the leader and a good guy that you want to follow. He's a bad guy.
Yep.
At this point, the group takes a nap because they're exhausted from trying to get there.
And he tells them to. He's like, "We're taking a nap." Like,
yeah,
he
and
kind
they
of
all
like
do.
he's like being brutally forced with these people now.
Yeah, well, now that he's revealed for who he is, he doesn't hide it.
He
He's
doesn't
just
even care. Yeah.
in everybody's face. He's aggressive. He's violent. Even
He's like,
even
"We're gonna take a
Kazan
nap
takes
for
a
an
nap.
hour." Yep, he tells everyone to. He's like, "We're gonna take a nap for an hour," and Worth is like, "How long do we know an hour is?" And he's like, "An hour is as long as I say it is."
Yeah,
And everyone's like, "Okay, dude." Like,
yeah, hours when I tell you it is. Yeah.
yeah.
Quentin wakes up first, and we see him
Dad?
pick up and carry Levin to another room, and he's telling her that he wants to leave Worth and Kazan behind, and just the two of them can get out of there. And then and she's like, "No, I don't want to do that." And at this point, he tries to sexually assault her. So everything that Holloway accused him of seems to be true.
Yeah, and he's really creepy. He's like, "We're two pieces of the puzzle. We're man and woman. We're like a key and a keyhole." And like he makes a sexual reference. Yeah, and it's just like this dude's lost his mind.
It's some of the worst innuendo you would ever dream up.
Yeah, it was. I was like, ugh.
So he's really aggressively coming on to her, and Worth comes into the room and breaks it up. He kind of runs into him and knocks him away.
Gives him a shoulder tackle real quick and like bumps him off.
Yeah, but he beats Worth. He beats him with a boot, and I thought he killed him.
I thought he did too.
He's beating him horribly, and then he opens the door on the floor and throws him into the room below. And
which I think he does like 3 times in this movie.
Yeah, he likes testing rooms by throwing Worth into them. Doesn't it? They're running low on boots, so he uses him.
He's like, "Here you go."
And we hear Worth down there laughing. And we're like, why is he laughing? He just got the
it's like maniacal laugh,
kicked out of him.
Hysterical. Yeah.
And they go down, and he's laughing because they're in the same room that Ren died in. His canoe head, as you called it, which is perfect, is in there, and they've been traveling in circles. Yeah. And at first, I thought when they first showed him, when my wife and I watched this, I'm like, I thought he beat him to death, and there's not a mark on his face.
Yeah, I think he had black eyes.
Well, no, then he turns and there's like blood on his head, and his ear is bleeding, and I'm like, okay, but his face was like, nothing.
Yeah,
but okay.
I just was assuming when I thought the same thing. So my assumption was he was just hitting him in the kidneys or something with the boot, and he's kind of like going like this, getting hit in the side.
So it looks like he beat his head, but not his face. And that was easier for the makeup people too.
Right. It's a low budget movie.
And so they've been traveling in circles. So at this point, Levin says, the traps are not based on prime numbers, but factors of prime numbers, and the possibilities are too large to calculate. And she starts like naming off a number, and her and Quentin are arguing about it. His sexual assault is shortly forgotten because of the dilemma they all face. And it's like, we'll address that if we ever get out of here, because it really doesn't matter if we die here.
Right. So it's one problem after another, which kind of it does really well with the pacing of the movie. Like, it doesn't dwell too long on one problem. It's always moving from one problem to another in this movie, which I kind of like.
Yep. Yeah, it's what, 90-minute movie. It moves
Yeah.
along quick. Um, but they're arguing about, he's like, you're going to have to do it. And she's like, it's impossible. And then Kazan speaks up, and we've really only heard him make noises at this point. And he is a savant who has the ability to calculate these long prime factorizations. So Levin reads him the numbers and he spits out the answer, and they know whether to go or not. And this seems to be working. So they determine that it's not 26 by 26 cubed. There's an extra room, and that the rooms are all rotating. And that at a very particular point, that extra room is the bridge to the exit. And they figure this out from the coordinate numbers on the doors.
And she's confirmed that, because earlier she was doing a calculation. She was like, wait, there shouldn't be a 27th room. That'd be outside the cube. And she's like, I think there's something wrong with the calculations. And then when they discover it's these permutations of factors, of factor analysis, she's like, oh, that explains it. And that confirms, like, all right, this is the way out. She's 100% convinced. She's like, this is the way out. That 27th room is where we need to get to, and we can get there.
Yeah, at the right rotation, that will lead us to a bridge to exit.
Mm-hmm.
So they start to move, and at every room they stop and they read the numbers, and Kazan gives them the answer, and they know what rooms they can go to and what ones they can't. As they're moving, everyone's through the room. Worth takes one of the doors and starts slamming it on Quentin's head, and he
keeps right in his neck.
Yeah, and he keeps slamming it till he pulls back, and he shuts the doorway, and they're trying to get away from him. Well, now Quentin's trying to chase him, and they trick him into chasing him when they have one of the bottom doors open, and he falls through. And they shut it and move on. Problem is, these doors don't lock. So it's he can figure out how to catch up to him eventually. But
they're one room away, like you said. They have to hurry up and move.
But they're hoping, without the ability of Kazan, that he's going to make a misstep and go into a room that's going to end him. They finally get to the exit room, and it is the room they all started in. And they're kind of laughing at the irony. They battled all these things. They lost people. And in truth, they really never needed to move. They just needed to wait until it rotated back to the exit position.
Yeah, and Levin says that, that's actually what I said originally, and I was right. And she kind of laughs at herself, like, I had a feeling that we should have just stayed put. She was
right.
like, but obviously you get scared, and there's social pressure, and you're freaked out, so you just go with the herd, so.
I would have a hard time staying put, because when challenges are presented, it always seems like you can't do nothing.
Right. Yeah, there's a psychology behind that.
So as as she was, I would have a hard time doing exactly that. And obviously, if they knew this, it's a different story.
Right.
But would they have ever figured this out if not for their exploration and their trial and error?
Yeah. You put a rat in a maze, every single rat you put in that maze is going to run the maze. They're not just going to sit at the front and go, no, I'm just going to sit here. You can't make me run the maze. Yeah. Like, and they could. The rat could just sit there and be like, I'm not going through all this. They'll just run the maze. You know what I mean? It's almost like an instinctual nature to do that. Like, oh, there's a door, let's go through it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you almost can't help it. Like,
yeah.
I mean, I would wouldn't just sit in that room. I'd be like, well, I can get out of here. And I'd start
let me try this. Let me try this. I absolutely would.
Yeah. You think you're in a prison cell and then you find a door, you're going to go through it.
So the cube rotates to the spot it needs to be. And they open the door, and there is daylight. They can't see anything. It's just a bright white light.
Yeah, it's like heaven's gate to them.
I was just going to say, it reminds me of what people see when they've experienced a death or near death experience.
Yep.
It's just a blinding light, but everything else they've been is darkness. So it seems to have a positive connotation to it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At this point, Worth goes through all this, and he sits down, and he doesn't want to exit. He's saying he has nothing to live for. He doesn't want to go. And Levin is encouraging, like, no, we fought through all this. We got to get out of here. Come on, let's go. And Quentin arrives, and he stabs them both. He stabs Levin first, and then as Worth stands up, he stabs him. And we see Kazan step through the doorway out into the light. and they know this thing keeps rotating. They have a very short window. So through all these things going on, Quentin now tries to climb out, and he's too late. He's half in and half out when the cube rotates and basically splits him in half, as he's out of the exit.
And they don't really show
that.
It. Yeah, it would have been cool, but with the low budget movie, it probably would have been real cheesy. So what they do is they show the cube moving, and you just see blood like smearing against the cement wall. And I was like, that's good enough, because if you show it and it looks cheesy, you're kind of ruining the moment, So they leave it to your imagination.
You're correct. If it would have looked, but the opening wire mesh and the acid to the face were both so good. That I kind of wanted to see something more. And
for sure.
And I thought we deserved to see Quentin, now knowing what an awful bastard he was. We kind of deserved to see his demise, I thought. But
yeah, and that would have been a great way to finish off the third act, right? Because you had 3 solid good kills in 3 different acts, and I think that would have been awesome. But for some reason they didn't show it. I'm just assuming it was budgetary. That's my guess.
Yeah.
Because the movie, it was gruesome. Like, it's not like it wouldn't have shown that type of thing. It showed worse. So
yeah, it almost reminded me of Absentia that we talked about a few weeks ago, where it just seemed to end when they ran out of money, and it felt a little let down like that.
Yeah, well, Hellraiser had the same thing, right? Fantastic movie, and then the last scene, it's like, let's just hurry up and do this.
Yeah. Worth and Levin are laying there side by side, dying. And Kazan goes into the light alone to an unknown fate. We really don't know what's out there. We hope it's something good. We hope it's an escape, but we really don't know. And other than the jobs that they've all talked about, we really don't have any insight into what that world even is. Is this in a futuristic dystopian society? Is this in, regular today world? So I kind of like that it leaves it ambiguous.
Yeah, and earlier in the movie, Worth is talking about, like, they're trying to figure out, is this Big Brother? Is this a military industrial complex? And Worth is like, listen, this isn't any of those things. There's no Big Brother. This is just an endless blunder of projects that were contracted out so many times to the point where no one even knows what the point of this thing is other than to just exist. And it's kind of like this whole allegory to capitalism, and they kind of touch on a lot of that, and it's interesting. But he's saying there is no point to this. It's just, we're just here pointlessly. A lot of money was spent, and so it gets used.
Yeah,
that's it.
Yeah. So this movie has some cool parts. I will say my biggest negative to this movie was most of the acting was horrid.
Yeah, it's very 90s sci-fi channel.
Yeah, Worth, the actor who played Worth, and I don't remember his name. I thought he was very good. He was understated. He was realistic.
Yeah, very nihilistic and dark and solemn. Yeah.
Everyone else was so over the top that I found it a little off-putting, because it was like, come on, nobody acts like that.
Yeah, I think Quentin, him being the main protagonist, antagonist, he's kind of the antagonist, I guess. Him being so over the top, like Batman bad guy type, it just kind of throws you off. It could have been a little bit more subtle.
Yeah, and Holloway the same. Her outbursts were I thought really bad, and
just overly zealous. Yeah, like bleeding heart doctor. Yeah, everyone's kind of over the top. And I think that kind of takes away from the uniqueness of the movie, which is what I've always appreciated about it.
Yeah, I think cool concept, and a couple of those effects were really well done. I think with better actors, I think it could have even been a little bit deeper. I think it could have been a real psychological study between these various mix of people thrown together, and I think they only skimmed the surface of that, and maybe some of that's just really because the actors didn't have that depth to them, or maybe the script just never went that deep. But I felt it could have been a lot more than it was.
Yeah, I agree. You know, I think some of the acting kind of just it goes a little too over the top. I think what keeps me involved in a movie like this is the actual, not so much the acting, but like the story. Like I'm interested in how the cube works.
Yes.
You know, so like you kind of get involved in that more than the story. Like, all right, these people are annoying. I hope some of them die. How does this cube work?
And
You know?
that's why it was so fitting, you know, the puzzle of madness, because this really was, you know, it was a puzzle both physically and mentally, with the numerical challenges and the physical act from getting from one place to another. It definitely really fit the category. So
And people go mad, and there's dire consequences. So
yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, interesting category. I really enjoyed taking a look at different ways in how the puzzles impacted these two movies.
yeah, I thought it was fun to do this kind of category where there's a lot of problem solving and problem solving with dire consequences.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Well, next week, as we get closer to the big day, um, we are going to go into Halloween movies. So that is going to be a lot of fun, and
Yeah,
we have
really good movies.
yeah, we have some real classics, and some real fitting movies for the holiday celebration. So that will be exciting.
Yeah, it's gonna be a good time. I'm
Absolutely.
bringing a
So,
bag of candy.
all
I'll be
right,
sitting
yeah,
there snacking on a bag of candy the whole time.
I got my haunted.
I love that cup. Yeah, I'm still using the skull. I'll be using this all month.
That's pretty good. Yeah, my wife just got this for me over the weekend. She goes, "Here, use this to drink out of when you're doing your
Yeah.
show," and I'm like, "That is so perfect."
You got a cider?
That is a Jameson and ginger ale.
Oh, nice. Yeah, that's a cool cup. I like that.
Yeah, so that is our show, Puzzles of Madness, this week. We are the Weekly Horoscope. We will be back next week. Like I said, we're going to tackle Halloween, but we thank you as always for listening. I'm Jerry, that's Matt, and we'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. Thank you, everyone.
Your weekly horoscope with Jerry and Matt.